Good evening, folks. Don't be shy. Come on in. I've been waiting for you. Settling quickly now. Your dear friend Phantasmal Poppy has quite a story to share with you tonight. Are you ready? Then let us begin. Last time I shared with you a bit of the history of the region of the Appalachians, or Appalachians, as some of you might say, and my theories on why paranormal experiences are so commonplace there. In addition, I offered you a story of the first time I saw a ghost in a house that I helped build. Today, I want to add upon that. So if you have not listened to that video, go back and listen to it, because you will need the history behind the area. And also, this video is going to completely spoil the ending of the last. So, for those of you who have not watched that one, I implore you now, go listen to that one first. This video will be here for when you are done. Oh wait. Are you back? Or did you just sit there, waiting for me to come back to the ones that have already watched the first video, and are waiting patiently for this next story? Alright. Moving along. I briefly mentioned that I once lived in a trailer, a mobile home for those of you who are far more familiar with that term. My family and I built my mother's house on part of the farm that once belonged to my grandfather, which previously belonged to his father, who my mother was sure was the spirit in the coveralls that I saw. The farm itself had passed through my family for several generations, and I want to think that only one other family owned that part that I lived on before us. The land itself was situated close to what was once a pre-Civil War crossroads. On top of that, before the settlers came through, the area was hunting ground to the Cherokee. As for any battles or skirmishes fought on the land, I have no idea. If there was anything of that nature, it has been lost to time. With those facts on the table, it is unsurprising that unexplained sightings could occur. That being said, when we built the house, we built it in a field. The only thing that had been there for the longest time was hay, cattle, and a big old tree. Either oak or walnut, I can't quite remember. Which one would think wouldn't exactly be the place for supernatural activity to occur, but it is possible other factors were involved. As I have said before, seeing that spirit was not, as they say, my first rodeo. It wasn't even the strangest thing I had witnessed on that piece of land, nor was I the only one to witness such events. Strange things happened in the trailer I lived in, and out on the farm. So why would a new house be any different? It certainly wasn't. Now remember, those old mountain folk are used to the paranormal. It doesn't bother a lot of them to talk about it. In fact, most like sharing their old spooky tales, so long as it's not something that can make them look bad in church. And that's why certain stories, like hearing a warning voice or seeing a vision that kept someone out of danger, are told more often than, say, something that seems like it would need an exorcist to get rid of. If you guessed my mother's house fell mostly into the latter category, then you would probably be right. After it was built, strange activity started up in it. Often you could hear someone walking up the stairs from the basement, or think you heard something out on the porch when, big surprise, there was nothing there. Occasionally, you could be standing in one room and hear your name being called in another. Admittedly, this was even creepier when you heard a voice calling you by your middle name, or a nickname that wasn't used very often in that house. You could pass through the hallway as carefully as you could, only to come back and find the picture frames had tilted on their own. These were just a few of the stories of things that would happen in that house. And strangely enough, they didn't always have a presence you could feel. Oh, there were occasions where I most certainly felt others in that house, others that I could not always see, but often heard, or, on some occasions, see the results of their actions, if you will. On occasion I feel that maybe some of my perceptions were lessened due to high amounts of stress. My mother was a very intense person, and some of those odd things had a habit of happening right before she would unleash an emotional crapstorm on whomever and whatever was within earshot. Still, there was plenty that would go on even when she wasn't there. All things considered, it isn't surprising that these events were not the sort that were often shared, even among other family members. That being said, when some things are so natural to your day-to-day life, you sort of forget that some things aren't normal for everyone else. Which made it all the more amusing when my mother got remarried. Her second husband was, for lack of better terms, huge. Almost 6.5 feet tall and built like a linebacker who moonlighted as a Marine sort of huge. The fact that he often wore a Stetson only made it even more awkward when he had to go in and out of rooms in our house, which was built for people who were much closer to the ground. He also had the volume to rival even some of the screeching Bible-thumping preachers I knew. If you had put this fellow and my mother together, you would have had this giant with a great booming voice as big as he was, and this little tiny rabid leprechaun standing next to him. It was like looking at a laid-back Great Dane next to an angry Chihuahua. This fellow was as tough as he looked, too. He was a born outdoorsman and an incredibly hard worker. He had been a scrapper in his youth and worked some particularly tough jobs. And this was a guy who had seen a lot in his time on this earth. So the sights of some things that would send others running to therapy did not even faze him. With one notable exception. You see, this big old boy, this hulking fellow built like a Marine, he was terrified of ghosts. And I do mean petrified. He was absolutely creeped out by the paranormal. Which made it all the funnier when he started living with my mother. I do believe this poor fellow was not properly informed as to how much the unexplained tended to happen around these parts, and around us women. Because if his reaction to what came next was anything to go by, well, let's just say he was in for a bit of a shock. The first time he encountered the footsteps on the stairs, I really wasn't even paying attention. In fact, I was actually in the kitchen at the time, listening to one of the earlier creepypastas on YouTube. You know, back when people were still using Microsoft Sam as a narrator. I was sitting at a small table we had in the kitchen, while he was in the dining room side. He was doing something with fishing lures, either sprucing up old ones or transferring them to a new box, I can't remember. I had my headphones in at the time and wasn't paying attention, but I did notice when my then soon-to-be stepfather got up to look down the stairs. He returned to the table and sat back down to look over his tackle again. A few minutes later, he was back to the stairs. This time, I had to take my headphones out because he had hollered at me. "What's that?" I asked. "Wasn't your mama supposed to be at work right now?" he said, turning to me with a confused look. I looked at the time. She had only been at work for a few hours, and since she only left work under dire circumstances, it was highly unlikely that she would have been home any time soon. When I told him that, the frown on his face deepened, and he disappeared into the basement. I just shrugged and went back to my video. A few minutes later, he comes back up the stairs and texts my mother with a really dark look on his face. He and my mother had been arguing the day before over wedding preparations and what they wanted to do when they returned to his hometown for the wedding. So, I just assumed that maybe some of his tackle he wanted to take had got misplaced during the packing process. However, a short time after that, I noticed he looked over at the door again. This time he looked around the room a bit before hollering at me again. "What?" "Where's the cat?" he asked that time. Really? I thought. What the devil does he want with a cat? This was before he came to really like the cat, having been used to dogs most of his life, so I highly doubted he just wanted to play with a new fluffy friend. I pointed to the chair beside me where the cat was curled up. Immediately, his frown went to a pure scowl. His phone went off and he picked it up. I just exchanged a look with the cat like, has this guy lost it? It was then that I noticed the gentle thud, thud from down in the basement. The sound of pressure being applied to the wooden steps and slowly plodding upward. My stepfather was instantly out of his seat and back to the basement door. He grabbed the shotgun he had been cleaning earlier, which had been propped against the back door, and threw open the basement door. I leapt from my seat so fast I nearly yanked my headphones out of my laptop. In the middle of all the excitement, the cat peeled out of the seat and darted out of the room as fast as he could go. I lunged for the landline phone, grabbing a knife out of the block on the counter. Crap, I thought. It was the first peaceful day since they had started making all of their wedding preparations. And the moment I get to relax, this happened. Was someone really in the basement this time? The rural community I lived in was spread out, but it was bad for break-ins. On top of that, there was a notorious drug-dealing spot in a secluded part of the road up about a mile away from our house. At this point, there was a look crossed between pure rage and utter bewilderment on my stepfather's face. He didn't lower the gun, but he glanced over at me, nodding down the stairs. "You heard that, right? Those steps?" I just blinked. Yeah? You would have thought I just told the man that his 80-year-old mother had gone skydiving completely starkers. The color drained from his face so fast, it was almost comical. Or it would have been, if he hadn't been staggering backwards like he was going to fall, with a thankfully unloaded firearm. I walked over, landline in one hand and knife in the other, still not sure what was going on. It was made clear a moment later, because he just pointed a finger at me and almost screeched, "You knew about that?" Completely lost, I just gave him a look. "There was a ghost in this house, and you didn't tell me?" And that was when I completely realized He really had no idea what constituted normal around there. So, with the knowledge that no one had broken into the house, I had my stepfather sit down and tell me what my mother had told him. Apparently, she had told him about some of the strange things that she had experienced, and that had happened around the farm. Nothing of what had happened in the house. And that, my dear friends, was only the start of my poor stepfather's many ghostly experiences in my mother's house. Thank you all for tuning in this time. Do me a favor and hit those like and subscribe buttons. It would make your narrator here very happy. And come back soon for our next venture into all things spooky. Good night.